Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice long lunch. Today's presentation is NAPCO, Presiding Judge and Court Administrator, Governance and Leadership Principles. The session is being live streamed, so if you have a question or a comment, please come up to one of the microphones. If you don't, then our online participants won't be able to hear what you have to say. And I just want to present the Honorable John Russo and Gordon Griller to you. They've made it very easy for me. They're going to introduce themselves, so I'll let them get to it.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, and thanks for having us. Little atypical is we're going to be interactive with you if you want to be. So I've met some of you. I'm just going to call your name anyways up to answer and ask some questions. But the reality is, if we could be involved with you a little bit, we'd like to be able to do that as opposed to just sitting up here. And so I'm Judge John Russo, right? But for this, what I'll say, cone of silence, we're going to talk. And you'll see that Gordy and I are going to talk to each other as Gordy and John. And it's really going to be the purpose of our conversation that we're going to have about leadership in the court and this productive pair. The ability to be the administrative presiding judge overseeing a court with your court executive, but the opportunity to build that leadership and confidence in each other. And when you do that, and talk a little bit about how maybe some of you might be able to do that, or at least take back with you to your courts some ideas of how you might be able to implement that ability to say John and Gordy. So for today, I'm John, regardless of a title, and Gordy and I are going to then begin to have our discussions with you. I want to set a little bit of the groundwork for you. Just for myself, briefly, 12 years in private practice, 18 years as a judge, 6 years I ran a court in what some might know Cleveland, Ohio, but we call it Cuyahoga County. The largest number of judges in the state of Ohio, 34 judges that I oversaw, as well as the presiding judge overseeing a domestic, juvenile, and probate court. About a $60 to $75 million budget, about 500 plus employees, and I did that for 6 years. And so I'm excited to come and share some of that with you or some of the thoughts that I had. Currently, what finds me with NAPCO, and on Gordy we'll talk a little bit about NAPCO and the vision of NAPCO, was the first president when we reorganized, had the first conference in Cleveland back in 2014, and currently I sit as the director of or the chairperson of the board of directors of NAPCO. What is NAPCO? The National Association of Presiding Judges and Court Executives. We're talking about a productive pair, right? The opportunity to work together in order to move a court and to move a staff and move a system together. And how do you do that? And for some of you and for some of us, it might be a little muddy waters, right? Can I really call him John when I'm in a private conversation with him? Is that okay? And how do we get to that? So a little bit of guideline. So if you do have a question and we do want to quiz you a little bit, or at least we put 2 microphones, so if you're in the back of the room, you can step up, or here. We want questions, so make sure you ask. If you're live streaming with us, please put them in the chat, and Joe's going to be able to get those questions to us as well. Of course, the material's been provided to you, but we are going to go through our materials. So interactive, John and Gordy, and we get an opportunity to talk to you about leadership. You know, NACM, as one of your cores, is leadership, right? And so how do we get to that discussion with you here today? And so we want to be able to do that. How about, just for a show of hands for Gordy and myself, do we have judges? Just an idea. Any judges in the room? Okay. All right. How about top level working right with your judge, court executives, court administrators, how you may call yourself, your names is the majority. And then Gordy, maybe the working, right below that would be the working leaders as well. Okay. All right. So there's only one John in the room, right? So if you Johns are watching live stream, or if you could go back and talk to your Johns when you leave here, that's going to be my hope. is that you can go and sit in a room and have the conversations that Gordy and I and expectations would have from NAPCO as well. Last thing I'll say is I'm watching the clock. So I'll just give you the idea. There's 5 core concepts we're going to talk to you about that are part of our monograph that Gordy's going to talk a little bit about right now. Gordy and I are going to go back and forth so that you're going to have engaging conversations with both of us. But this 10 or 15 minutes of this introduction, then we're going to hit the 5 leadership concepts that we want to talk about regarding this productive pair. And each of those we're going to spend about 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to guide us to our 75 minutes so we don't leave any of the important parts behind. So 10 or 15 minutes right now, 10 minutes for each of our leadership, and then we're going to see if we can answer some questions at the end if you have any. But if you have them in the middle, please do so as well. Gordy.
Yeah, thanks, John. One of the things John and I talked about before we ended up coming here to present the program was to envision yourself in chambers with your judge or the judges in your office as a court executive. And that kind of relationship, one-on-one, is what we're going to try and talk about in regard to this document. You can download this document either from the NAPCO site, and I think it's probably on the NACM site too. I don't know, Jude, if you could, double check. But this is available for anybody that wants to take a look at it. And it's got 3 different basic components. One is this component of team building. How do we, at the top of the organization, or how does our leadership team, when they're working with different judges, because I know that, as John mentioned, he had 34 judges. I managed a court in Arizona at this time now. It's got 100 judges and 50 sort of commissioners that have the power of a Superior Court judge, and about 3,000 staff. So basically, what we ended up doing is dividing the number of managers, the number of administrators up, so they served each one of these particular departments or divisions: criminal, civil, juvenile, family, and so on. And I used to tell at least those folks that watch what I do with the presiding judge, and I expect you to do the same thing with your department or leadership judge. And so we tried to do that so that we develop kind of a career ladder for folks. And whether they wanted to stay with the court or not, great. Or whether they wanted to move on to other kinds of activities. And I know 3 or 4 of you that were working with me back in the 90s and the early 2000s have spun off to do their own court. So it's a great training ground. That's really a team building leadership sort of focus. So that's one of the focuses in here. And then also we want to mention that to run a modern trial court is a 2-person job, okay? It's not and we know courts, maybe you know courts, where they don't have a administrator, that the judges end up trying to run the things on by themselves. But we believe and we stress that it's a 2-person job at the top of the organization. Thirdly, we talk about loosely coupled organizations. How many have heard that term before, loosely coupled? Okay, so Mary McQueen has been here.
Yes.
We know that. Indeed, loosely coupled organizations made up of professionals with autonomy and the ability to work on their own are very difficult to lead. And so we talk about techniques on how to do that in this document as well.
So there are some chairs up here if you want to come up as well. A little bit, Gordy doesn't like to talk about himself. It's hard to believe he's 60 or going to be 60 years old when he tells me he was 16 years as court administrator in Arizona, 20 years in Minnesota as court administrator, and then worked for the National Center for a number of years consulting. And so a little bit of Gordy's background because he doesn't like to talk about himself. So he comes with this experience as well. Lastly, with NAPCO, we had the opportunity to do this monograph with a grant from SJI, so we were excited to be able to put this up and use this as an opportunity for us to have a chance to talk, but also for those of you who want that opportunity to be closely tied with your significant partner in your organization. With Mary McQueen and the National Center, I don't want to push that aside because they're partners with us in what we call Academy Day every year at our conference, where you and your judge may get an opportunity to come in and actually work through the dialogue that needs to be done in order to move yourself along during his or her term as the judge leading the court, with you then taking that judge along. So just a little bit for the National Center and thanking them as well.
So here's another chart that just indicates what is in that monograph. And we do cover things like governance principles for both the bench and the leadership team, and certainly these various roles for presiding judges and court executives. We try and stress, as an administrator, the term we use is court executive, not court administrator, not court manager, but court executive. So there's it's not that we're diminishing the other terms, but we think that raises the level of a non-judicial top leader to a more effective relationship with a presiding judge.
There are chairs up here, and you won't interrupt us at all if you want to come on up. Hate to see you stand.
Yeah, John, you want to hit the next one?
So we'll talk a little bit about these principles, really from the bench side and then from management side. So when looking at the bench and having an opportunity to understand the principles that you look at, some of the things that I wrote down that judges, when I was the administrative judge, I had to deal with a number of things that judges were looking for me, right, to bring to the table. Not to have an ego, right? I wrote this down. Honesty. Make sure that I'm including them, that it was inclusive, that I consulted them, that if there was a conflict, that I'd have a chance to deal with conflict. So what I did in trying to make sure I handle these principles was to have this theme, that I was the CEO of a corporation. And being the CEO of the corporation, I had certain investors that I had to speak to and answer to. And my judges were those investors that I needed to make sure that when I was making a very important decision that would affect them, that I would make sure that I had them included in the conversation. Not every conversation, right? There's not every time that a CEO makes a decision that he has to go back to she has to go back to the board of directors, the people she answers to, and make sure that we've got buy-in from them, or that that I've explained to them what the next steps, and then vote to see what that next step was going to be. So my job as the administrative presiding judge, as the CEO of my court, was to make sure that the investors in my court were happy, engaged, involved, that it wasn't about an ego. It wasn't about me running a court the way that I felt was important, but rather that everybody was coming along with me. Now, don't get me wrong. I knew that I needed 18 votes to get something passed, but that didn't mean I shied away from the others who didn't agree with me, but I wanted to be able to answer the questions that they had to at least get them to understand what those next steps were going to entail. So they may not agree with it, but we were going to move a certain way. So I think when you look at the principles that were important for me and the judges that I was in charge of, to make sure that promoting trust and supporting those judges was important for me in this relationship that Gordy and I were going to start out on.
Yeah. So the bench, when it comes to governance, should be only dealing with top-level issues. We know benches, in some instances, get too far into the weeds and start doing all sorts of micromanagement stuff, judges individually or bench as a whole. What we're proposing in this monograph is that when the bench is involved in particular issues, that they're high-level policy-based issues, and that the court executive, and John, I would call you instead of a CEO. I know your background is more business. I think before you were a judge, you had a business degree.
Correct.
So I would call you the chairman of the board as opposed to a CEO. So, a little bit different distinction. As far as the leadership team, the kinds of governance things that the leadership team needs to be responsible for need to be laid out so that the bench fully understands that the kinds of things that judges are involved in as a board of judges, if you will, are high policy levels, and leave the day-to-day functioning of the court to the presiding judge and to the court executive. Okay. In this document, there are 28 different roles and responsibilities that we've laid out. And these are kind of differences between who does what, roles and responsibilities. This might be a good document for you to take a look at or to download for your chief judge or presiding judge to look at as well. And then maybe use that to go through the kinds of roles that you and your court are involved in.
I think when you download it as well and you read it, for some of us judges that were in leadership position, you might want to give a brief synopsis of why it's so important for the relationship between you and your judge and your team and your court. I think if you ran it off and you just dropped it on my desk and you said, hey, John, hey, Judge, take a look at this. I think this is important. We covered it at NACM. I would say, look at it, download it, read it, and then brief it in a small synopsis and tell John why this is so important for you and the leadership that she's providing for you and where we're going to go with this court. So I just think that's important. I'm not telling you to do that, but I think it's important, right, for you to do that. And then that judge or that executive will maybe take the opportunity to read it themselves.
Yeah, and here's an
Yes.
Wayne from Canada would like to know, what are your respective roles in securing additional resources from the executive or legislative branches?
Yeah, so the question, if you didn't hear that, was Wayne from Canada. Did I get that right? All right. Asked what's a role that I had in securing finance or monies from the funding agencies. So as the administrative judge, a lot of that was left to Gordy, but then the opportunity to stand in front of council and the county executive to tell the executive why we needed the increase in the assigned council funds to $6.5 million from $6 million the year before would come to me. So I would almost, I would be prepped by my financial team. I would be prepped by my Gordy, and then I would get an opportunity to stand in front and make the argument to the county executive and to the finance director for the funding agencies.
Yeah, and as far as a CEO is concerned, I think one of the basic issues is the budget tends to be so detailed that most of the time the CEO or the staff ends up putting the budget together. And once that happens, and based on, say, programs or policies that the court wants to pursue, trying to draft that into the budget, and then that, just as John says, use the power figure, who is basically the chairman of the board or the presiding judge, to deal with the elected officials. As a matter of fact, I know when I was in St. Paul and we had to go to the county board, the county board was so impressed by the fact that the presiding judge came to actually present the budget that they would stop whatever was going on and they'd say, we see the presiding judge back of the room. Judge, come up and let us know what you think about the future budget. And so that really helps. And I think then the administration of the budget after the fact is the responsibility of the CEO. And anything that kind of goes sideways, then the productive pair gets involved and says, hey, wait a minute, we've got a serious problem with the number of self-represented litigants that we didn't expect.
All right, I told Gordy already that I'm going to interrupt just to keep us on track. So let's go to the 5 concepts. And again, I'm going to try to spend somewhere, we're going to try to spend somewhere about 10 minutes on each of them to get us to our time frame and then see if there's any questions. Are there any questions as of now? Okay. I'm excited that Gordy took me from the CEO of my court to the chairman. So I'm excited, but it makes sense as he said it to me. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm the chairman, I'm the chair of the board of directors right now for NAPCO, and that makes a little more sense. So Gordy, thank you for that. Hey, so here's the 5. Court executive is a strategic partnership between Gordy and John, wherever they are in your court. Roles and responsibilities being complementary, frequent access and communication we're going to talk about. This mutual trust, I'll give you a little bit of how I try to build that, because I was new. I was the John that my team had never had, and they were a little like, what do you mean you want to talk to us? Or what do you mean you're asking me to make a decision? So I'll talk a little bit about that trust factor and then some shared visions and see if we can go from there. So the first concept, this idea that the CEO is a partnership, just remember, right? Ultimately, who makes the final decision? You know it's the John, or I should be saying John or Jane. That would be fair for me. I have 6 sisters, 3 brothers, and the 6 sisters always said that I'm their 7th sister. So I don't know why, I just have that compassion. I tell them all the time. So anyways, I diverted from there. But the ultimate decision is your judge, right? So you all know that eventually that's going to happen. But please don't be shy about giving your opinions and giving your reasons why and why it makes sense. I remember right off the bat, and I'll talk a little bit about these constructive criticism interviews that I did with my staff at the end of the year. And of course, they were very nervous the first time. But one of them spoke up independently in my chambers where I was doing constructive interviews. And she said to me, Judge, you just move too fast sometimes, which was just fantastic for me, right? And I did, right? I was in my first year and I'm thinking there's all this I want to do and there's so much that I think needs to be changed and I was just boom, boom, boom. Not only type A, but Gordy said I'm probably a little bit on the spectrum. He said AC/DC, and I said, no, not AC/DC. I don't like them. I like Bruce Springsteen, and he just announced his tour, if you don't know that, as you've been sitting in here. His American tour in 2023 is coming. Very excited. Cleveland, Milwaukee's on the list too, if we want to come back here. But this idea, the judge has the final decision, top level, but how do we get there as a team? How do we make some decisions? So this strategic partnership, Gordy, why don't you jump in a little bit?
Yeah, some of this material that we included in this monograph, actually from the National Center programs, and also from some of the experts in team building. How many knew Dale Lefevre? Anybody knew Dale Lefevre? Okay. A lot of this stuff is Dale Lefevre's sort of direction too. Very bright guy, and I think he's retired. He was the director of the family practice group at the University of Michigan. Okay, so strategic partner characteristics. A verbal visionary. How many times have you, as a court executive, gone into the chambers of the presiding judge and you had a report that was maybe 200 pages and had probably 10 different sections, and you had given that to the presiding judge a week before. Presiding judge had other things to do, had other things to handle, and so on. So you had a meeting scheduled, and you went into chambers, and you said, John, what do you think about this report? And John would come over, and we were sitting down, and he'd put his hand on my knee, and he'd say, Gordy, tell me what's in this report and why I should really care. So one of the things that a strategic partner does is a strategic partner is a verbal visionary. You need to ensure that your skills are such that you're able to communicate with your presiding judge in a verbal sort of fashion. Because a lot of times they don't have time to read a lot of things. Then take the boss's perspective. You know why presiding judges sometimes don't listen to staff the way they should? Because staff views the world through whatever function they're doing. If they go talk to a human resources person, that person views the issues and the problems through that human resources lens. And if you go talk to a criminal department head, they'll view it the same way through a criminal department sort of viewpoint. So you have to think more globally. You have to be up at the 10,000, 20,000 foot level to really be a strategic partner. You have to understand what essentially the boss's perspective might be. And so you need to get out of, if you grew up as a human resources person, you need to get out of that functional area and into more broad scope. And then thinking strategically, providing ideas and options and alternatives, and looking for patterns. When you take that 10,000 foot look, that sky cam look, as many of you probably remember in football games and so on, you can kind of decide and kind of figure out where things are going. And so strategically, then you can sort of plan your next steps. So you need to be up at that level. And lastly, trustworthiness. You need to keep confidences, and you need to exhibit competence in your work. And we'll talk about trustworthiness a little bit. Now, here are some indications of a strategic advisor. Let me just read these really quickly because I don't think you can see them that clearly. When meetings are held, do they wait for you to arrive because you always add value to the discussion? Are you sought out and brought in early? Do others see you as influencing decisions? Do people remember what you say? Do people share your stories or lessons as if they're their own? Do people learn things from you, maybe even quote you? Do others seek your opinions and ideas? So are you at the table at the point where decisions are starting to be made? And do you contribute? Okay. New boss,
all right.
new rules.
Any questions about that? You know, I see someone in the back of the room I want to recognize. So, Bob Wessel, where are you? Everybody know Bob? I don't know if you do or not, but Bob, just stand up for a minute. Bob's the past president of NACM, but he is a true help with NAPCO and the reorganization that we did at NAPCO, and sits on our board. And I thank you for your leadership with NAPCO as well. I think I saw you back there, but I didn't recognize you. So thank you as well. The new boss, right? So I'm coming in, and who's coming in next, and how do I prepare, and do I have to change, right? So how many of you have that meeting with the new boss coming in, and who's had that right now, right? So who has sat with the new AJ coming in? Tell me about it. I mean, is it tough? Is it hard to do?
It was. We framed it around it being a strategic plan so we can combine our ideas.
Okay, so we called it a strategic plan. Did you do it in-house, or did you go out and have lunch? Or did you do it in the court?
In-house.
In-house. Anybody else who raised their hand will just share with me? Yeah, where'd you do it? Where'd you guys meet?
In my office.
Really? All right.
A couple times, and new presiding judge from my division.
And did you ask for the meeting in your office, or did?
No, he came and sought me out after speaking to the city.
Okay, was there a reason why you didn't seek out the new judge coming in?
It was way ahead.
Okay, so it was,
He sought me out months before he came.
oh, great. All right, and did you, helpful, I would think? Yeah, anybody else want to share? Yes.
I'm going to my third president judge.
Yes.
So 5 years ago, and right now, my president judge, this is up in June of next year.
Okay.
NAPCO will be in LA.
All right, good.
He's coming. it was different navigating for my first president judge because he was more old school.
Yes.
And this present judge is more tech savvy, and he's on his dime. He's real fast.
Right.
It took me time to acclimate to him.
Very good.
And right now, we have that trust and that I can talk to him and say, hey, Mike, you're wrong.
Not-
This is my
Good. All right. That's what you're hoping to have, that good relationship.
We have a great relationship. And one of the biggest things that built our trust was when we were going through the race relations, George Floyd
Right.
situation. We sat down and had a tough conversation about race relations in our court, in the nation, everything. That gave me, I can trust him.
Good.
He trusts me. So we have that.
Yeah, now you're in Pennsylvania, right? If you get a president judge?
Right.
Okay, where in Pennsylvania are you?
I'm in Easton, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
We're in Lehigh Valley, right on the border of New Jersey.
Okay.
Okay.
So, Gordy had to do this 11 times. So 11 different times that Gordy had to sit with the judge. And so those of you who haven't, I would say that to transition to a new boss and to understand the work style of that boss, you should try to, if you know who it is already, you should plant a seed, Judge, when you're ready, I'd love to have an opportunity to meet with you and then see what she has to say back. But I think you need to start dialoguing so you know who your boss is, you know what the history is, what are they envisioning, what are some of the groundwork that they're going to do. Are they someone that's just coming in and they're just going to continue to run the ship the way it is and there's nothing new? I think you need to jump out in front of that right away, have that discussion from a management point of view. And then, if you can, you take what they have. You're probably going to have to go back and dissect it with your team a little bit about what Russo wants to do, and then try to move forward in that matter. A couple things: analysis paralysis. Mm-hmm. So don't overanalyze it because you're just going to keep analyzing and analyzing and analyzing. So go meet that judge and put a plan together, right? As the court executive that's going to be running the court with your productive pair. And then be proactive with me on what your next thoughts are, right? This is where I think we need to go, Judge, with you saying you want to increase funds here, you want to hire more people here, you want to change the pretrial diversion department, you want to, whatever it is, start having those open discussions and thinking out loud, right? And remember, facts, what you said to me earlier, Gordy, facts don't always change a person's mind.
That's right.
So even,
that's kind of unusual in our business because we're in the fact business, and the reason people come to court is because they can't decide what to do with a particular dispute, and so we spend a lot of time with facts and due process and all that sort of stuff. Well, psychologists basically say that your beliefs and your attitudes and your values are the lens in which you view facts. And oftentimes, facts won't change people's minds. Now, look at the vaccine situation that we faced as a country. So the one thing that you need to understand, and I think presiding judges need to understand it too, is that you need to try and get through the fact situation to what the attitudes, values, and beliefs of the people that you're trying to persuade. I know from a lot of experience that I've had with the National Center and case flow management and all of the issues that we have to go through to try and improve a particular court and how they handle their pretrial issues, how they handle their trial issues, and so on. And we can give them 40 years of facts on why a meaningful event needs to be defined this way, as opposed to a status conference that keeps going back.
Right, I'm going to jump to our second here to keep us on track. I was thinking to facts. Institutional knowledge. You have it, right? So pat yourself on the back because I didn't. And so that's your muscle. You have institutional knowledge of how that court runs that I don't. And, the codes that I could slide in a raise without raising too many eyebrows with where it moved within the budget, I didn't know about that and how that worked, but it worked, and I was educated on it, and that opportunity to become a strategic partner with my executive officer was important. Okay, let's go to just responsibilities being complementary. I'm gonna let Gordy jump in and maybe just handle the next 3 slides with a couple of comments.
These are some old but effective slides. And I think Dale had done some of this, or a guy by the name of Keith Stott years and years ago. And this is sort of a description that they used back in those days about how you could diagram administration and adjudication. They were trying to figure out what kinds of roles presiding judges and court executives needed. And so this is very much an oversimplification, but where we're trying to go in that monograph is to say that there certainly are some decisions that the CEO needs to make on her own or on his own. And those need to be laid out in a role sort of fashion. So in other words, if it's confusing as to who's responsible for what, there are all sorts of exercises you can go through. And I think NACM Core Competencies talks a lot about roles and relationships. Is that right? Have you been through some of those courses? I know Janet, I see Janet Cornell around someplace. Yeah. Yeah, hi Janet. Don't they in the core competencies talk about roles and relationships?
Yeah, the competency on leadership is one. What else, Kevin? Governance, oh my gosh, yes, governance. And strategic planning. So at least 3 and even more as content and distinguishings.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what would be, say for instance, a presiding judge decision in your court? What would, you're as a CEO haven't been involved in, what would be a decision that a presiding judge would make on his or her own? Anyone? Okay, and Mike? Yeah, go ahead. Kevin?
An ethics issue involving another judge.
Right.
If there was something that came up, they would probably want to deal with that directly.
Yeah. Maybe a disciplinary issue and so on. Judges have codes of judicial behavior, and if a judge doesn't report bad behavior on another judge's part, they're complicit in it. So yeah.
Or even a judge's docket, right? So you're concerned, it's slow, something's happening, it's not being moved, whatever the form is, right? That's me going to speak with that judge as opposed to you.
Yeah. What would a CEO make? What decision would be on your own? What do you decide? Do you decide human resources issues, like who goes where and what kinds of jobs people are going to be in, and maybe how the budget is going to be moved around, maybe the line items and those sort of facility security, all of those kinds of things, roles for the CEO. And
okay, I do. If I know Gordy called on you, so you didn't have the microphone. But if you're I'm gonna try to repeat just in case. But if you have a question, please just jump to the microphone since it's being live streamed. And that was our participant from Canada was not happy. It was not. But I'm just kidding you out there. I'm smiling. Okay, Gordy, we'll go to that next one.
Yeah, you want to hit the next one? Okay, and another diagram from Dale Lefevre. Early on, and obviously where the monograph really focuses is on that left-hand series of circles, the interdependent team, where you each know who's responsible for what kinds of decisions, that you work together, that there's a series of joint decisions, and that you as a CEO are treated as a strategic partner at the highest levels. Collaborative decision-making. The center circles are more the hierarchical type of stuff that exists in corporations, not in loosely coupled organizations. It may exist in a judge's staff, So in other words, where, say for instance, a judicial assistant is appointed by and serves at the pleasure of a judge or a court reporter or a law clerk. And that's the dependent control model to a kind of a far bizarre sort of approach. It would be, I own you. If I want your opinion, I'll tell it to you. Okay, and the one on the far right is independent, decentralized policymaking. That's where I think, as Dale Lefevre used to say, I don't mess with the presiding judge, and the presiding judge doesn't mess with me. We each have our own little particular areas. Now, in some instances, have we got any clerks of court here? Elected clerks of court? All right. Oh, you do? Okay.
There's one clerk here on the left.
Yeah.
Raise their hand.
Oftentimes, the elected clerk of court operates quite independently. And so what's wrong with that picture? Well, organizationally, probably nothing's wrong with that picture. But for the purposes of the court, in other words, the institution, it does create particular issues and problems. In other words, it's very difficult to be a strategic partner and to share ideas and share decisions when you're in a silo. And we know that from justice systems in general, because most of the justice system, with the sheriff and the probation department and sometimes the clerk's office and so on, operate in these silos. And silos are probably the most destructive element when it comes to innovation, because you're never sure what happens in a silo. And oftentimes, if you're down in the silo working, you can't talk to somebody else in that other silo without going up to the top and then having that person talk to people so that you can get those silos together.
I'm going to have Gordy talk about this role negotiation, but I'm going to give you just one thought to take with you. So when I sat with my court executive the first time, I reached out to him and said, hey, we should probably talk. My time's coming up here in 4 months. And so we went outside to a Panera's and had a chance to sit down and talk. One of the things that developed over that was this discussion of roles, what my duties were, what his duties were, what his staff did. But one of the things that I think developed over the course of my 6 years was the ability to use me in my position when there was a difficult decision to be made by you. So you have a decision to make. It's clearly a court management decision to make, a court executive, but the decision's not an easy one. But if your judge was able to stand up and she was able to speak for that position, it would hold more strength or more water. It may even divert the blame to you and just it falls on me. So it was something that developed over time after that first year and a half, but it worked, right? I would, in my daily meeting with him, I would say, is there something coming up that you need me to stand up and argue? Is there something that I need to stand up and take it on the front, but I'm going to argue for on your behalf? So that might be that relationship that you want to eventually try to build with your John or Jane, so that you can get that opportunity to say, hey, I need some help. I've made this decision, and we're going to remove the parking that we pay for the probation officers, the 250 probation officers. We've been giving them a $10 stipend, and we're union negotiation right now, and because our probation officers are union, and we're going to remove that. We're not going to give them that anymore. We want you to be the face of that. Oh, they didn't like me, but I was the face. It was me that took that away, but it was really my court executive who asked me to do so.
Yeah.
And then these road negotiation.
This particular role negotiation, this is one of the, John mentioned the Academy Day activities that we end up doing. And we find it's really quite effective between, say, a CEO and a presiding judge. So we have them sit down and we go through this. We think about the relationship. This is tasks, and they don't criticize. we ask them to list the kinds of things independently that they feel that their counterpart it would help them more if they would do more of it or do it better. And then less of. If you were to do the following things, says the presiding judge to the court executive, or would stop doing them, it would help me to increase my effectiveness as a presiding judge. And lastly, the following things which you have been doing help me to increase my effectiveness, and I hope you will continue to do them. So it's a little dialogue, it's all structured and so on. It's not a situation where there's a lot of anxiety and tension. It's relaxed, and so we would suggest that those kinds of tools. There's another one called decision rights that we end up doing. Who's got the right to make a decision, and who should be informed, who should be consulted, that sort of thing.
How many feel comfortable going back and saying, "Hey, Judge, let's sit down and do this this project"? Come on, some of you. Okay, I tell you, I'm just going to tell you, it was, in the conference again with the academy, when we're calling it Academy Day, so Gordy and I keep referring to it, but it's really Mary coming in with the National Center and partnering with us to bring in leading individuals in the United States that are leading leadership opportunities and coming to help with the productive pair. And it's really an academy. It goes all day where these dialogues, and you sit down. It was not easy, and I'll just say that, even in that setting, to be sitting at a table and I have my deputy chief, 2 deputy chiefs, my finance, so, because it's not just my court executive who came, it was the team. So I brought who I thought the 3 other productive pair that worked with him so that all of us could be at the table together. But to go back, I did this when we went back to the court too. And I used it when a situation came up that I knew was going to be difficult to deal with my court executive, right? He never had someone like me. And it was hard for him, right? It was very hard for him to understand that I wanted input. I wanted constructive criticism. I wanted thinking out of the box. So I role-played a few times, and I'm just saying that these type of negotiation and sitting and talking about openly at a table with your staff was great for me, and I'm challenging you, since there's no Janes or Johns in this room, to go back and do this, because I think it's really important, and I think it'll show you're thinking out of the box as well on how you can get to that situation.
Yeah, and you may need a facilitator to help on something like that too, and a lot of communities have people that
Right, you bring in your deputy
executive.
sheriff, make sure they're there.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, actually, that might not be a bad idea.
Not be a bad idea.
A coach.
I agree.
A lot of
I
executive
knew what you were
coaches.
talking about.
I think I even recommended that
For
at
us,
your court.
we went out and got a coach, and
Yeah.
we'll talk about that.
Okay,
off camera. All right.
Yeah.
So this one, a little bit frequent access and communication. I mean, it's just a given, right? How much FaceTime are you spending with your judge right now? Average, I mean, are you, let's just show of hands, once a week? Once? All right. 2 to 3 times a week? All right. Every day? More than you want. Right? Are you not being productive because the judge is asking you up to meet with them all the time? Anybody?
Too much micromanagement.
All right, I won't call out anybody's name, just in case. Hey, Patty, how are you? And so what FaceTime, 2 to 3 times a week, at least maybe scheduling that Monday morning meeting and that Friday meeting where you're going to prepare for the next week. But FaceTime is important. If you're just getting FaceTime, though, FaceTime doesn't always turn into execution of what you're trying to accomplish. So sometimes I'm seeing a lot of you, but I'm never asking for your advice, right? So you're just there. and you're having conversation with me, but I'm not asking for your advice. That's a problem. So what are methods to keep those lines of open communications? Anybody? What are any of you doing to try to keep lines of communications open? Lunch, emails, the text messaging. I'm more of a texter than I am the emailer, right? So I gave everybody in the building, here's my cell phone. If you need something, you should text me, right? But get out of the building every once in a while, right? So does anyone do a monthly management meeting with the higher up executives, which are all of you, and your judge? Do you do that once a month where you bring that judge in and everybody, just a few? Think about that. So I asked that be done. Why did I ask that it be done? Why do you think? Anybody? Why? Right. It wasn't so much me. While it was helpful for me, they're doing their job. And I would always say, you know your job better than me. These are the 4 people you want me to hire, and there's no, then go ahead, we're hiring them. I wasn't micromanaging, but it gave me an opportunity to know that all 5 of them were saying something that they were all hearing, right? Because they're in different parts of a building. And then I would see where someone would say, well, you know, I'm thinking of doing this and we're moving in this way. And the other person would say, well, wait a minute. How much does that cost? We've never talked about the budget. And so then there was this, we're going to take the money out of this fund. And so it was good conversation. So think about that as well. But keep those lines of communications open. Gordy, some thoughts to that before we move to the...
Yeah, I had a judge that I used to work with in St. Paul that I'd walk into his chambers and he would say, Gordy, what do you know that I should know? I knew a lot of things and I didn't need to share all those things with him. But it kept me on my toes in a lot of ways because I was able to at least broad brush a lot of the policy level issues and so on. But I basically would say, I've got this, I can take care of this other stuff. If I need your help, I'll really, I'll be there right away. But anyhow, John, you want to move to the next one?
We're going to talk about trust.
Yeah.
Right here, you said trust, number 1 in your court. Right?
Yeah.
That trusting relationship. I think this is
a difficult
one to talk about. Gordy, I'll let you jump into a couple of these.
Yeah. You at NACM had a spectacular sort of trust expert at one of your conferences. I think it was in Florida. Stephen Covey, I think. Was that his name? Yeah. And he wrote the book, The Speed of Trust. And I'm sure he's a wealthy guy, and I'm sure he does a lot of other programs, and he's probably out of reach for most of us now. He probably costs quite a bit of money to come and talk about trust. Some of this stuff is from Covey's work and from some of the work at Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania and some of the other places. But trust is probably the most difficult thing to really accomplish, especially if you're involved with judges, leadership judges every 2 years, which is a common term for a leadership judge in a bigger court. We recommend, of course, in this monograph that 2 to 3 years be the minimum, more likely 4 years. Arizona went to an interesting deal where the Supreme Court appoints the presiding judge like they do in New Jersey and a few other cases. And so they appoint the presiding judge now in Arizona for 3 years, and then they have kind of an assessment after that 3 years to determine whether the judge did a good job and if the judge wants to continue on as presiding judge. And so if everything looks okay to the Supreme Court and others, and sometimes they call the court administrator, well, how's your presiding judge doing? So that puts me on the spot. I said, well, what do you really want me to tell you, or is this confidential? And believe me, it's never confidential. So So I don't. So we don't really share too much with the Supreme Court on some of that sort of stuff. But the end result is, if you've got really a bad actor, I think then you're obligated ethically to say, hey, this court is going the wrong direction. And I know some people that have done that, and it's worked for them. And then if the person wants to, and if the Supreme Court says everything is fine, then they get another 3 years. So they get 6 years in office. And I think our friend Joe Welty in Phoenix is on his second 3 years, and he's a spectacular PJ, I know. But so trust is not only what you do and what you say and how you're perceived, but it's palpable. I suppose it's emotional in some sort of ways. And when you have a high trust relationship, you can describe that. Say, I depend on this person. I end up really feeling comfortable talking about things that maybe I wouldn't talk about if I didn't have a trusting relationship. Sort of like your marriage relationship to a certain extent. And if there's low trust, you can describe that too. We've all had those experiences. We all have had people that we don't trust, and for probably good reasons, certainly. So it's an internal state, and I've come to believe that there's two basic factors in trust. One is benevolence, and the other is competence. And benevolence is putting the interests of someone else ahead of your own interests, or putting the interests of an organization or a principle ahead of your own interests. And so in the relationship with the presiding judge, if that relationship is a trusting relationship, the presiding judge knows that you've got in his back or her back. And you know the same thing about the presiding judge. Competence is not only the ability to perform in what you say you're going to do, but it's the results that are actually observable. So trust can be not only important, but it can be dangerous as well, because in a trusting relationship, you make yourself vulnerable. And John, you want to go to the next one? You're going to talk about the three things that trust does.
I'm going to tell you just a couple things when I came in as the administrative judge in order to build the relationship. So you should know that when I first came in Cleveland and in Ohio, the administrative presiding judge only had a 1-year term. And eventually I went to the Supreme Court and I impressed upon them how important it was to have more than a year, and they allowed it to be modified to 2 or 3 years. I then convinced our court to change it to 2 years, and then eventually ran my course up into 6 years where I stepped aside. And some of those things, when you start to build these trust factors, was this relationship and comment that I even say till today. When someone says, can I share something with you? I say to them, whatever you share with me is in confidence. If I breach your confidence, I'll step down as the administrative judge. I'll walk away from being the Veterans Treatment Court judge. You know what? I'll speak out that I've done that in a wrongful way. Now, I do that on all my civil dockets. So I handle civil dockets over $15,000. And I have a settlement negotiation that's right on my webpage, which is different than others, but it really relies on trust. And the parties trusting me that what they share with me, I won't share with the other side. And I've said to every lawyer for the last 18 years, if I breach that trust, then I'll walk away as a judge, right? I've been called out one time by a lawyer, called me out as breaching a trust in a settlement conference. And eventually when he talked to the adjuster Well, regardless, he apologized later. So my point is this, it's that important. When Gordy gives you your description of someone you highly trust and someone you don't, I'm not going to call you out to do that, but you could do that in your head, right? What's so important about creating this partnership and making it easier? One of the things I did is this idea of, can my court executive trust me, and can they trust that I trust them? And that's when I did these year-end constructive criticism interviews, where I would sit with my management team individually and hear from them constructive criticism about me, and I would turn and give them constructive criticism where we could build off that relationship. And it would be that constructive criticism between us. So I didn't go to the next person and say, hey, Andrea just talks way too much, and I told her she just talks, So it was nothing that I shared with anybody. It was fantastic for me as a judge in that role as the administrative judge, because it helped me lead my team in a way that I could feel confident that they had my backs and that I had their backs, which then helped us when we went in front of the 500 employees. So one of the things they asked me to do is to build trust with the 500 employees, that they always thought the administrative presiding judge was this person who didn't care about the organization. So I changed that, and what I did every January for the month of January is I met with all 500 people or their departments, and I held opportunities to discuss what the future of the year entailed in my vision, that I wanted them to know, that I wanted them to play a part in. And I would then give a PowerPoint presentation about leadership or public service or servant leadership or diversity. And those type of things that I wanted the court to do, I wanted to tell them personally myself. And that came out of these trusting conversations that I had with my team in order to understand the issues that were there, that they were facing, that gave me an opportunity to stand up and speak in this relationship. Gordon.
Yeah, great. Here again is some information on these benevolence behaviors and competency behaviors. If you remember what Covey, because he really impressed me, I've read a number of things by him, and he basically indicates that these are important sort of deliverables when it comes to benevolence and when it comes to competence. And if you do them as an administrator, or if a presiding judge does them as a lead judge, and it's visible to other people, visible to you as a partner, trust levels go way up. And
can you restore trust, Gordy? Can you restore it once it's lost? If you broke,
well, now that you've asked that, John, I think we've got a slide on that, so we can probably talk about it. And this kind of puts it in perspective too. So what happens when you make yourself vulnerable and you believe in the other person and you trust that person to have your back? What happens when that doesn't occur? And maybe you've had that happen not only in personal relationships, but in business relationships or court relationships as well. And just as this slide says, it takes a while to build up a trusting relationship, but it takes an instant to destroy it, especially if there's deception involved. And what do I mean by deception? If the person lies about the activity. In other words, don't worry, I didn't say anything, everything is fine, the confidence that we have with each other, don't worry, it's all good. And when you find out later that not only wasn't that true, but it was a lie, a deliberate lie, then you've got some serious problems. So I should mention that there's some ways to recover from a broken trust, and I'll depend on Covey to give us those. But let me just read what the possibilities are here. Research has found that a promise to change behavior helped restore trust initially, but a promise was not very effective when deception actually was involved. An apology didn't seem much to matter at all, even when it included the 5 elements of apology. A statement, I'm sorry. Remorse, I feel terrible. Self-castigation, I'm an idiot. An offer for restitution, how can I make it up to you? And a request for forgiveness. Now, what tends to restore trust in some sense is behavior, not just words, but behavior, and observable behavior over long periods of time. So I hope you don't have to run into those kinds of situations. Some of you may have with previous jobs and so on, but trust is delicate. Trust can be destroyed quickly. So the relationship that you build up with your working partner, with your productive pair, is critical to build it on a firm foundation of trust.
And I think one of the things that those of us in the room should think about is what you promise or what you say you're going to deliver, right? So I think measure that so that you're not oversaying or you're overselling it, and even undersell it a little if you think really I'm going to have a bigger outcome if I do this. I'm going to save the court really 7% on this bottom line, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to indicate I'm going to save money. I think we're going to save 3 to 4%, and get yourself a pat on the back later when you might be. I expect this. We could go as high as this, but don't oversell yourself so that your relationship depends on this overselling. Find that common purpose between John and Jane and Gordy and see how you move forward. And you can do that and revisit that every year when you move forward with your judge. So I know we're coming up on, so Jill doesn't have to tell me, almost 5 minutes. And so I'm just going to go to this last shared vision and agenda. Gordy and I put down just a few things, and you'll find this in the monograph as well. This shared vision and objectives, have a vision. So if you don't have a vision, then it's just wishful thinking, right? So if you have a vision, share it. Put it out there so that and encourage your staff to give you their visions so you could share their visions with the administrative judge as well. And make sure you focus on, give a clear focus for the judge on those areas that you want to change, those ideas that you have, and even give credit to those who are also providing it to you, right? So if you're getting it from someone within the organization and underneath your management or underneath you who you manage, make sure you give some of that to everybody. Give them that credit when you sit with the judge as well. Elevator speeches, you have to be able, those opportunities to get on an elevator and give your thoughts, that's really not enough time, right, Gordy?
Well, if you're a verbal visionary.
Right, verbally. I made it my point for 6 years to learn everybody's name that got on an elevator. So I just, when they get on the back elevator where judges were, then they got on, they usually found themselves somewhere away from the judge and down on their phone. And then I would, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they'd hear, "Hey, good afternoon, how are you?" And they'd kind of look up, and I'd say, "Hey, I'm Judge Russo, John Russo, what's your name?" And then I usually find myself outside the elevator when they got off the elevator, kind of following them. "So what do you do?" So that was my elevator speech. People, like, when the doors open, they're like, he's in there.
Yeah, you'd make a...
Yes, I do that now when I get on an elevator. I met a friend of Gordy's yesterday who was on, Bob and I came back from a dinner, And Bob, he spoke today. He was,
Yeah, Joe Frazzari.
yeah, I don't know if any of you heard Dr. Frazzari speak on storytelling. But man, as soon as he got on the elevator and said hi to Bob, I'm like, I got to know this guy. And luckily he got off on the 7th floor where I was. And then I followed him and his wife, and he's like, get away from me.
John, have you ever been arrested, John?
At the next, he finally pulled out his car and said, hey, tell Gordy I said hi. We're going to go. Look, the idea of this productive pair is so important for all of you. It's really for the future of your court and how you're going to move in a way that's successful, right? For you, for those that you manage, for those that you oversee. It's important for me as the administrative presiding judge, with the judges that I answer to the court personnel that I answer to, on making sure that we're successful. And so to break some of those barriers right off, to know where this productive pair is going to move, is challenging. Sometimes it's a little scary, and sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking for some of you. But I would tell you, be the new wave. Push a little bit. Ask your judge to go to the conference where you could sit and talk at a table about role-playing different situations so that you could find answers to some of the questions that are out there for you. So we're at a point where questions and answers. Gordy, if you want to wrap up with any of your thoughts.
Well, we have about 4 minutes, John,
Right.
so we could...
Jill, is there any question out in the...
Yes, Diane from Colorado. She has been a court administrator for 22 years with the same presiding judge for 22 years. Unfortunately, he passed away. The first meeting with the new presiding judge was in her office. They continue to meet frequently, at least once a week, and then also bi-weekly meetings with the entire court management staff. But a very great idea she had was she prepared an orientation manual of all their current orders, policies, historical summary of issues, other onboarding items to help them get started together.
So handed almost a booklet to the new presiding judge or whoever's been elected. Hey, here's currently what's in place and some things that you might want to look at, so when we do sit down, you have some knowledge. Really great.
Some courts, California is a prime example. The associate presiding judge or assistant presiding judge becomes the presiding judge. So when the courts elect a presiding judge team, the court administrator actually works with those 2 judges, and then the associate becomes the presiding, and another judge comes on. So even though the term is only 2 years in all of whatever it is, 58 counties in California, at least the administrator has a chance to work with a team for a period of time. It seems to work fairly well in California. So that might be, in other courts, I know it's a 2-year term, and oftentimes it's voted, the new presiding judge is voted in by the bench. And the first time the court administrator gets to know who the presiding judge is when that puff of white smoke comes out of the chimney, and it's like, oh, it's Bill Jones. He's the new presiding judge. And I know I've had those situations where, a presiding judge is elected by his or her colleagues, and I never worked with that particular judge because that judge was not in a leadership group. So it was a decision to swing the court in another way.
Anybody have a burning question? You all want to? Well, then we'll say thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for being here.
thanks.
You could reach out to us. I'd be happy to talk to you. Thanks.